Right.
probably not what, the player of Lancelot came in, you know,
No.
and so, true love with Guinevere, yeah, that got in there, but, backstabbing son of a bitch betrayal of your best friend, is that's on there too.
Also got on there.
Yeah.
That's-
So that now I think we're looking at where that energy in that manuscript comes from. It's from the accepting of a price to pay. And
yes.
then if we
Right.
turn that to your later logic of this is all about the legacy scroll, now we're
Right.
talking about a really nice version that deepens and romanticizes the Marvel Universe version,
Yeah.
right? It
Yeah. Right.
romanticizes it by putting in the chance of this legacy being quite an interesting patchwork.
Right.
So that is sort of interesting. I'm almost kind of tempted to say the situation changes hard because of conflicts that are won and lost, but how the situation turns out really isn't going to determine what's on the legacy. It's going to be where you knocked it out of the park, and it's going to be where you chose some horrific price.
Yes. Right.
Right.
Right. Um, I was thinking, for instance, assets. You've got your family's sword, like just an example, um, and you have the opportunity to win this contest that's going to bring you more influence. It's going to bring you whatever. Do you? But
Well, hold on the breaking the sword. Breaking swords is noble and tragic in the line of no, you use it for an assassination. You use it
right,
dishonorably. You tarnish. You this sword can no longer be called. Your family will never accept this sword back.
right,
It is no longer its story with us is over,
right.
right?
Yep, yep.
Um, and so the idea that you can do this is actually kind of I'm starting to kind of feel that it's like reading the old manuscript again
Yeah,
and saying
yeah.
aha, right? Let's think
Right,
about how situations are prepped. Let's think about how things get onto the legacy scroll and how the situation is changed. And a simple-minded way would be fight the right conflicts,
yeah.
and then what you do to win that conflict goes onto your scroll, and then that changes the situation. No, that's too tight, right? That just
Yeah,
couples everything in a little domino. And this is the kind of thing I'm saying. Which one of these is it about changing the situation in a specific way, or is it about what you had to do and how well, like how heroic, how nobly and ignobly you changed the situation, whichever way it turned out.
right.
Okay.
Um, I think one of the things along those lines has been the idea that um, um, the rising of your honor, influence, and stuff like that. You get nothing on the scroll unless you gamble with your things, your doodads, your
Right, but does
attributes.
that necessarily mean that you would always be? Uh, I mean, I'm trying to think. I mean, you got to get good things on the scroll too, right?
Right. Yes.
And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
and I'm saying you can do that without. I mean, by definition, risking your honor with this thing, you're that's a bad thing. I mean, what you're doing is you're buying success at the conflict, the chance for success
That's
at the
right.
conflict by doing this
Right.
bad thing. So, what do you do to I think do you just do well? I mean, this is where blow on the dice and they obey and you're like, oh good, I was able to get this good thing onto given this conflict that I'm in. This is worth writing down as a legacy thing. Um, is it that
Um,
easy? I mean, is it just getting good rolls, or is there something you do you have to say beforehand? I mean, this could go on legacy. I kind of like the Marvel Universe way. If you look back on the session and you go, "Oh, I really liked saying that. I'm going to write that down," because you don't have to,
right.
but
Yeah.
you've let it sink in a little bit, and you liked it, right? Or you You say it's more important for me to write down that I was kind to the orphan child than it was that I, rescued, that I fulfilled the mission for the top dude. It's more important for me that I rescued this orphan guy. So you figure that out at the end. So maybe good things that
Yeah.
go on the scroll, you're allowed to pick one thing at the end of a session, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just pick whatever
I
it
think
is.
that would be,
Yeah.
yes. And I do think that
The bad ones you get through the role gambling, and the good ones you get because you liked a thing. You can always get a good thing. I like that.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's good. What was I going to say? I was going to say something. I was going to say something profound. I swear. No.
I'll listen.
Um, well, I think too, what might, depending on the umbrella, like a conflict of honor might come to, there is that, hey, I sacrifice, or I'm gambling my honor to try to succeed versus I don't gamble my honor
Right.
to try to succeed. And maybe,
well, again, though, isn't that
maybe
kind
there's
of
something to not gamble? Maybe there's a benefit to not gamble because otherwise people gamble all the time. So there's got to be a benefit to not.
Maybe
gamble.
not. That legacy's looking kind of nasty. If you if you ask me, that's
True. If you fail a lot, yeah.
You know what? I think that's something that should be left to play. Let's find out. Let's find out. I mean, if you find that some formalized way of getting something good on there seems necessary, then consider such a thing. But right now, trying to balance it in our heads,
Yeah.
is not going to get us anywhere.
Right.
So that's something to consider. But I also think that the consequences of the rolls themselves, the idea that nothing happens this round, we need to look at the dice in terms of like things happening. In the round, things happen.
Right.
Things are going to hit. Things are going to, you're going to feel that roll, whatever it is.
You're gonna be repositioned,
right?
Whatever reposition means from round to round.
Absolutely, and I think that is, it's worth considering.
I think that the only thing I worry about, well, not really worry. That's not the right term. I don't want it to be, obviously, I don't want it to be a D&D kind of slugfest. And I definitely want to formalize player narration, maybe of success and failure.
Right. You see, that's an interesting point. Let's take a look at two kinds of. You see, the trouble is with the word narration.
Yeah.
Because let's use, if we're talking about a person vocalizing into the air, then let's call that talking.
Talking, yeah.
Right. And so then there is the outcome of a conflict, which is it's once it's established, then we know this has happened in the fiction. We know that this has occurred. So you have hit the foe or you haven't. You have killed the foe or you haven't. You have taken injury or you haven't. These things are outcomes. It was uncertain before we did the procedures, and now it is certain. But none of that, and that's what I'm calling outcome. Now, I call it outcome authority because I have always seen that it has to be said.
Yeah.
And the way I've been saying it for a while now is that when you use dice and things like that, it is a self-imposed constraint on what your outcome authority can do.
Right.
Right. So that's what it is. That's what those things are. They are self-imposed constraints upon that. And then you start looking at all the other authorities and go, oh my God, there's all these games with self-imposed constraints on those too. Right? Who knew?
Yeah.
Who knew that rolling on
Right.
the encounter table was a self-imposed constraint on situational authority? Because that's what it is. Okay,
That's a
so
really great point.
mhm.
The GM doesn't really have power. They roll the chart, and the chart says
And if
there's a random
that's
encounter.
true, but the GM, then you turn it around and say the DM does have the power to decide to impose that constraint by playing this game. That's what the game is in many ways,
Right.
is a set of
Yes.
saying, do you accept these constraints on the various authorities given how they're distributed? Right?
Right.
Do you
Yeah.
accept these constraints into it? Why? Because fucking constraints are awesome. They
Yes.
just are, right? No bounce, no
Right.
fun. So
Exactly.
the thing with back to looking at the outcome of, shall we say, a significant combat. Things have happened in this combat, right? So then we move to what's
Right.
called narration authority, which is the clinching of the outcome in terms of what it looks like and what immediately is the very next sort of thing, from it. And it's usually quite immediate, and you will find that sometimes it's no more than a sound effect or
Yeah.
whatever. But one of the important things about it is that we've always thought of it as coupled to outcome. We've always thought of that description as merely just the coloring up of the outcome.
Right.
But that's not true.
Right.
That's not true at all. We see often that narration authority is used for extra content that actually isn't in the outcome.
Right.
And we often see that it has a curious quality that it is the person who has the outcome authority is often decoupled from the person who exerts narration authority at that time.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's often very informal. It can be just somebody at the table shouts out a sound effect and everybody nods, right?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, or it could be somebody says something like, "Oh, geez, that the somebody is it's like you got a decapitation on the table." Right, you roll and you got,
Right.
okay, it's a decapitation. This particular game puts that in as part of outcome. Other games may not. They just, his hit points went to 0. How? Okay, then that goes to narration authority. But here, let's say it's in
Yeah.
there as part of outcome authority. But then someone else says something like, and it lands in the soup bowl.
Yeah.
There's narration
Right.
authority, decoupled from outcome authority right there.
Right.
And there's
Yeah.
lots of others. And so notice that I have said nothing about like, oh, I get narration authority? Cool. Well, the clown is really the butler. Right? No, that's backstory
Right.
authority.
Yeah.
See, that's not narration authority at all. That's backstory authority.
Mm.
Right?
Right.
So we're going to not talk about that. That's just a can of worms, and
Yeah.
everybody's terrified of it. And it's so easy. Just say that's backstory authority, and you don't have it. There is no
Right.
problem here. So
Right.
here, though, what we learn is that in one very critical way, since narration authority is often exercised at the table, in many ways, it doesn't matter who has it. But in other ways, it does matter who has it, because it turns out that that's what everybody is. How am I going to put it? That particular exercise of authority has a uniquely powerful role in gluing the whole medium together for all of us all the time.
Yeah, it does.
And so it also plays an enormous role often in terms of characterization. Is my character effectively a comedic character? How many times have you
Right.
played and the game master has typically exerted the narration authority and they keep getting your guy wrong? Right?
All the time.
Yeah. And
But
so,
also
right.
as a GM, I do it all. I make that mistake too. Yeah.
And well, that's one. Now we go and we look at Troll Babe. Now we should be looking at the pool and probably inspectors to give them their
Right.
due. But just because I know why exactly I parsed it the way I did for Troll Babe, which was that the game master is given narration authority for the character's successes, and is specifically enjoined to complete the stated goal with no extra content. And to do it in a way that honors the tone that the player took in stating the action. If it's comedic, finish it comedically. If it is dramatic and emotional, finish it dramatically and emotionally. Whatever the action is, right? Have that, have that be the case. The player always narrates the failures. At the different level of failure that the game permits, the player always narrates it. And that's because I'm thinking of the way that players surprisingly have a very, very clear idea of whether they want the failure to be the character's fault or not.